Give your heart to Jesus. When fear blocks your path, He gives you courage. Fear does not begin in the moment something threatens you. Fear begins the moment your heart steps out of alignment with the truth that should be guiding it. Before fear blocks your path, it first gains permission to sit where courage was meant to dwell. And when fear takes that seat, it starts shaping your thoughts, narrowing your vision, and shrinking the possibilities that once felt reachable. You begin interpreting life through a lens that was never meant to lead you. You start preparing for outcomes that may never happen. You start doubting strength that never truly left you. Fear is powerful, not because it is stronger than you, but because it occupies the place Jesus is supposed to hold. There is a moment, often unnoticed, where fear quietly assumes authority. It begins tightening your reasoning. It begins convincing your mind that danger is everywhere. It begins telling your heart that you are on your own. It begins whispering that progress is unsafe and staying still is protection. The mind starts working faster, but not smarter. Thoughts begin circling without producing direction. Pressure builds without creating clarity. Every possibility feels risky. Every step feels uncertain. This slow takeover rearranges your inner world until fear becomes the default interpreter of reality. But something else is happening underneath all of this. There is a part of you that knows fear has taken control of a space it does not deserve. That part of you recognizes that you were not created to live hesitating. You were not designed to walk through life shrinking from every unknown. You were not meant to repeatedly negotiate with your own anxiety just to move forward. Something inside you is aware that courage has not died. It has only been overshadowed. It has been covered by layers of pressure, doubt, and misalignment. Jesus does not ignore this part of you. He moves toward it. Fear gains power when the heart becomes disconnected from the one who provides strength. When the heart drifts, fear enters quickly. When the heart returns, fear loses ground. Jesus is not waiting for you to become stronger before He steps in. He steps in to make you strong. His presence does not argue with fear. It replaces it. His truth does not negotiate with insecurity. It removes it. His clarity does not compete with confusion. It dissolves it. But this happens only when the heart gives Him the place fear has been occupying. The reason fear feels like a wall is not because it is impenetrable. It feels like a wall because your heart has been trying to push through it with its own strength. Fear always wins when you face it alone. Fear always collapses when Jesus stands in front of it. Courage is not born from determination. Courage is born from surrender. When your heart chooses Jesus as its center again, something shifts. Thoughts begin to loosen. Breathing becomes lighter. Pressure loses its urgency. What once felt impossible begins to feel manageable. The path ahead does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes walkable. In this moment, your heart is being drawn back to the place where courage forms. Not courage built on confidence in yourself, but courage built on the presence of the one who does not waver. Jesus gives a kind of courage that does not disappear when pressure rises. He gives a courage that stabilizes the mind, strengthens the heart, and realigns your entire inner world. The courage He gives is not loud. It is steady. It is clear. It is rooted in truth, not emotion. It is anchored in His authority, not your fear. Today, you are not being asked to pretend you are fearless. You are being invited to give your heart back to the one who can quiet the fear that has been blocking your path. You are being invited to stop battling fear with your mind and allow Jesus to reclaim the seat fear has been occupying. When He takes that place, courage rises naturally, not because you force it, but because He produces it. The misplacement principle. Fear does not dominate a life because it is powerful. Fear dominates a life because it has been misplaced into a position it was never designed to occupy. This is the misplacement principle. It explains a truth many people never recognize. Fear only grows strong when the heart gives it a seat that belongs to Jesus. Fear becomes the ruler when the heart becomes the throne. And everything inside you begins to follow that misplaced ruler without questioning its legitimacy. The mind starts interpreting the world through fear's assumptions. The emotions begin responding to fear's predictions. Decisions begin flowing from fear's warnings. Your entire inner world starts operating as if fear were a reliable leader, even though it has never been one. Misplacement happens gradually. It happens when disappointments stack up faster than healing. It happens when unanswered questions build more quickly than clarity. It happens when responsibilities increase while internal strength decreases. Without noticing it, the heart begins to shift its weight towards self-protection. The heart looks for survival instead of truth. It seeks control instead of surrender. It listens to the loudest voice instead of the wisest one. And fear always speaks louder than Jesus when the heart forgets where to stand. Jesus speaks with authority. Fear speaks with urgency. And urgency often feels more convincing than authority when the heart is tired. Fear occupies space because the heart unconsciously invites it. It starts with small permissions. You allow fear to explain the uncertain future. You allow fear to define situations you do not understand. You allow fear to predict outcomes that have not happened. You allow fear to interpret silence as danger. Each small permission adds weight to fear's position until it becomes the default interpreter of your life. And when fear becomes the interpreter, courage does not simply disappear. It gets buried under layers of false conclusions that your heart never examined. Descartes believed that the mind must question its foundations to discover truth. Misplacement is the opposite. Misplacement allows assumptions to become foundations without examining their validity. Fear convinces you that something is unsafe, and you accept it. Fear tells you that the future is dangerous, and you agree. Fear paints a picture of failure, and you stare at it as if it were reality. The heart stops questioning whether these interpretations are true. It simply reacts. And reaction-based living is the breeding ground of anxiety. The misplacement principle exposes something deeper. Courage is not missing. Courage is simply no longer seated at the center. Jesus is not silent. His voice is simply being overshadowed. Strength has not disappeared. It has only been redirected by fear's influence. When fear sits where Jesus should be, your life begins to feel like it is constantly shrinking. Your world becomes narrower, your choices become limited, your confidence becomes fragile, your sense of direction becomes unstable, all because fear is occupying a seat it never earned. The heart cannot serve two rulers at once. It will always lean into what feels more immediate. Fear offers immediacy. Jesus offers stability. Fear offers intensity. Jesus offers clarity. Fear triggers urgency. Jesus restores order. The heart that has forgotten its center chooses intensity over clarity, because intensity feels more real in moments of uncertainty. But intensity does not build direction. It builds panic, and panic never leads to courage. Misplacement changes only when the heart is confronted with truth, not emotional encouragement, not temporary motivation. Truth. Truth reveals that fear has been using authority it does not possess. Truth reminds the heart that courage was never meant to be created from self-reliance. Truth shows that Jesus is the only one who can hold the center without collapsing under the weight of it. When the heart recognizes truth, it becomes willing to question the voice it once obeyed without hesitation. The beauty of the misplacement principle is that misplacement can be undone. Fear can be removed from the seat it has occupied. Jesus can reclaim the center. Courage can rise from the place where fear once ruled. The shift does not begin with trying to be brave. It begins with recognizing who belongs at the center. Once Jesus takes his rightful place, fear loses the position that gave it power. The heart becomes steady again. The mind becomes clear again. The path becomes possible again. This sets the stage for the next revelation. Understanding the exact moment fear took control and how it froze your ability to move forward. The psychological freeze point. There is a moment, often subtle and almost invisible, when fear stops being an emotion and becomes a force that takes control of your inner world. This moment is what can be called the psychological freeze point. It is the exact point where courage collapses, where your sense of possibility narrows, and where every step forward begins to feel heavier than the last. The freeze point is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that the heart has been overpowered by pressure it was never meant to carry alone. The freeze point arrives when your internal systems become overwhelmed by conflicting signals. Your mind tries to reason through uncertainty, but every attempt at clarity creates more tension. Your emotions try to stabilize your reactions, but the intensity of fear disrupts their balance. Your spirit tries to maintain direction, but the pressure of imagined danger makes every path seem unsafe. This internal conflict generates a sudden tightening. Your thoughts no longer move freely. Your options no longer feel open. Your vision no longer sees possibility. Everything begins to contract inward. The body reacts before the mind understands what is happening. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles tighten. Movement slows. The heart tries to protect you by minimizing perceived risk, but in doing so, it makes you feel trapped. The freeze point is the moment where the mind's instinct for survival overrides its capacity for clarity. It is the moment where self-protection replaces direction, and once self-protection becomes the priority, forward movement becomes nearly impossible. The freeze point also distorts logic. Thoughts that once felt manageable begin looping without resolution. Situations that once seemed simple become overwhelming. Future steps appear larger than they truly are. The mind starts interpreting uncertainty as danger and silence as a threat. It becomes difficult to distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. Fear creates a magnifying effect. Small concerns become large obstacles. Minor doubts become major warnings. A single uncertain moment becomes a forecast of failure. Descartes taught that the mind must separate clear ideas from confused ones. The freeze point does the opposite. It merges everything into one tangled mass. Clear thoughts become unclear. True concerns mix with imagined fears. The ability to question assumptions becomes weakened. The capacity to reason becomes compromised. At this point, even wise thoughts lose their influence because fear has become the dominant interpreter of reality. The mind is no longer leading. It is reacting. And reactions do not build courage. The freeze point is powerful because it convinces you that stopping is safer than moving. It persuades you that staying still will prevent disappointment or danger. It tells you that waiting for perfect clarity is the only way forward. But the freeze point never resolves itself. The longer you remain in it, the tighter it becomes. Fear thrives in stillness not because stillness is wrong, but because stillness without purpose becomes a breeding ground for anxiety. The mind begins creating stories to justify its paralysis, and each story strengthens the illusion that you cannot move. Yet even in the freeze point, something remains untouched. The spirit does not freeze. The spirit remains aware that fear has taken control. The spirit senses that something is misaligned. The spirit knows that courage is still present beneath the layers of tension and doubt. This awareness is the signal that the freeze point can be reversed. The same moment fear used to tighten your world can become the moment Jesus uses to reclaim it. The freeze point becomes an opportunity when you recognize that your inability to move is not a failure. It is a sign that your heart is trying to carry something only Jesus can lift. The freeze point is the evidence that it is time for him to step into the space fear has occupied. It is the moment where surrender becomes the pathway back to courage. When Jesus enters the freeze point, he does not push you forward. He centers you. He stabilizes you. He restores your ability to breathe. And once you can breathe, you can move again. Understanding the freeze point prepares you for the next breakthrough. Seeing how Jesus reclaims the center of your heart and restores courage from the inside out. Jesus as the recentering presence. When fear takes the central place in your heart, everything inside you begins to rotate around it. Thoughts revolve around what might go wrong. Emotions revolve around what feels unsafe. Decisions revolve around avoiding discomfort rather than pursuing purpose. Life becomes organized around survival, not direction. This is the true cost of fear. It does not simply make you feel afraid. It becomes the gravitational center of your inner world. And whatever occupies the center controls the movement of everything around it. Jesus does not confront fear by wrestling for control. He confronts fear by reclaiming the center. When he steps into the place fear has occupied, the entire internal system begins to shift. Thoughts start reorganizing. Emotions begin settling. Decision-making becomes clearer. Jesus does not merely remove fear, he replaces it. His presence carries a stability that rewrites the foundation of your reactions. A heart centered on fear is reactive. A heart centered on Jesus becomes responsive, deliberate, and grounded. Fear thrives in the absence of certainty. Jesus brings certainty through truth, not through predictability. Fear says the future is dangerous because it is unclear. Jesus says the future is secure because he walks before you. Fear requires full understanding before you act. Jesus requires trust before you move. Fear builds its authority by magnifying vulnerability. Jesus builds courage by revealing his nearness. The shift from fear to courage does not begin with feeling stronger. It begins with recognizing who is now sitting at the center. Descartes believed that for thought to regain clarity, it must return to a firm foundation. Spiritually, Jesus becomes that foundation. When the heart places him at the center, fragmented thoughts begin aligning around truth. The distortions fear created lose their influence. The assumptions that once guided your choices begin dissolving under the weight of divine clarity. Jesus does not need to shout. His presence reorganizes the entire inner atmosphere. What once felt chaotic begins to take form. What once felt unstable begins to settle. What once felt overwhelming begins to quiet. One of the most powerful aspects of Jesus as the recentering presence is that he restores proportion. Fear exaggerates everything. Jesus recalibrates everything. Fear turns small uncertainties into large threats. Jesus places challenges back into their proper scale. Fear makes you feel smaller than your circumstances. Jesus reminds you that he is larger than anything you will face. This restoration of proportion is usually the first sign that courage is awakening. The situation may not change immediately, but the way you see it begins to transform. When Jesus takes the center, you begin to notice a shift in your internal dialogue. The thoughts that once spiraled now slow down. The questions that once felt urgent begin losing their pressure. The fears that once dictated your decisions start losing their authority. Your mind becomes more still, not because the situation has changed, but because you are no longer interpreting the situation through fear's lens. You begin interpreting it through presence. Presence changes everything. Fear convinces you that courage is something you must generate through strength. Jesus reveals that courage is the natural result of alignment. Courage is not loud. Courage is not dramatic. Courage is the quiet confidence that rises when your center is stable. It appears when fear no longer controls your decisions. It grows when truth becomes the foundation of your thinking. It strengthens when surrender provides space for Jesus to work. And it lasts because it does not rely on emotion, but on the one who does not change. Jesus, as the recentering presence, reclaims not only your heart, but also your direction. He leads you gently out of the internal fog that once held you captive. He realigns your perception so you can see clearly. He restores your pace so you can move without panic. He reorganizes your priorities so you can choose without fear. His presence becomes the reference point for every decision ahead. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what rises when Jesus takes fear's seat inside you. And once he sits there, the entire trajectory of your life begins to shift from inward tension to forward movement. This opens the path to the next transformation. The moment where fear's authority breaks and a holy exchange begins within you. The transfer moment. Every transformation begins with a shift, but not the kind of shift that happens outside you. The shift that changes everything happens in the inner space where you decide who will hold your heart. This is the transfer moment, the holy exchange where fear loses its authority and Jesus steps into the position that rightfully belongs to him. The transfer moment does not begin when circumstances improve. It begins when the heart recognizes that clinging to fear has produced nothing but exhaustion and paralysis. Fear has offered warnings, not answers. Control has created pressure, not direction. Self-protection has maintained survival, not growth. At some point, the heart becomes honest enough to admit that fear cannot lead it into the future. The transfer moment happens the instant you stop negotiating with your fear. Fear always speaks in conditions. It tells you to wait until you feel ready. It tells you to move only when circumstances feel safe. It tells you to trust your own strength instead of surrendering to Jesus. This constant negotiation drains the soul. The longer you attempt to manage fear, the stronger it becomes. But the moment you stop negotiating and hand Jesus the space fear has been occupying, everything begins to change. The shift is internal long before it becomes external. This transfer is not about trying harder. It is not about pushing yourself beyond your limits. It is about releasing what was never meant to be carried. When the heart stops fighting to maintain control, it finally becomes free enough to receive clarity. When the heart stops insisting on certainty, it becomes open enough to receive guidance. When the heart stops trying to predict outcomes, it becomes still enough to recognize the presence of Jesus. The transfer moment is not the collapse of strength. It is the restoration of strength. It is the moment where you stop relying on your own reasoning and begin relying on the one whose vision is not limited by fear. Descartes believed that recognizing the limits of one's own understanding is the doorway to truth. The transfer moment embodies this principle. It is the acknowledgement that your ability to navigate fear is insufficient without a greater source of stability. It is the realization that your thoughts become distorted when fear occupies the center. It is the understanding that your emotions become unreliable when pressure becomes the filter. When the heart recognizes these limits, it becomes ready to embrace truth instead of illusion. In the transfer moment, truth becomes stronger than assumption, and Jesus becomes stronger than fear. The transfer also involves a rearrangement of internal authority. Fear no longer gets to define what is safe. Anxiety no longer gets to determine what is possible. Doubt no longer gets to shape your expectations. Jesus becomes the interpreter of your future. His voice becomes the anchor for your perception. His presence becomes the stabilizing force behind every decision. This exchange is holy because it restores the heart to its proper structure. The heart was never designed to sustain fear as its guiding influence. It was designed to respond to truth and to move with confidence under divine direction. The transfer moment changes how you feel, but more importantly, it changes how you think. Instead of seeing obstacles as evidence that you should stop, you begin seeing them as opportunities for Jesus to strengthen your courage. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as danger, you interpret it as an invitation to trust. Instead of imagining worst-case scenarios, you begin sensing the possibility of new beginnings. Your entire inner world begins reorienting itself around the presence of Jesus. What once triggered panic now ignites awareness. What once caused hesitation now inspires reflection. What once led to paralysis now leads to surrender. The transfer moment does not eliminate fear instantly, but it removes fear's authority. It breaks the illusion that fear must be obeyed. It exposes fear's weakness. Fear cannot maintain its power when the heart refuses to give it space. Once Jesus occupies the center, fear becomes only a voice, not a ruler. A voice that can be heard but no longer followed. A voice that can speak but no longer direct. A voice that loses its influence every time your heart leans into truth. This moment marks a new beginning. It prepares your inner world for a deeper surrender, where the heart becomes calm enough and open enough to receive courage directly from Jesus. Sacred descent into surrender. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when movement must pause so the heart can descend into a deeper form of stillness. This descent is not collapse. It is not defeat. It is surrender in its purest form. A sacred descent into surrender is the point where you stop fighting fear with willpower and begin allowing Jesus to do what your strength never could. Surrender is not the abandonment of responsibility. It is the release of burdens you were never intended to carry. It is the moment where your heart stops resisting the presence that has been reaching for you all along. True surrender is not emotional. It is structural. It changes the architecture of your inner world. As long as the heart remains elevated in self-protection, surrender cannot occur. The heart must descend from its defensive posture so it can receive guidance rather than generate it. In this descent, your inner walls begin to loosen. The arguments you have been having with your fears start losing their urgency. The pressure to predict the future begins to soften. The need to control outcomes begins to weaken. Surrender does not demand that you understand every step ahead. It simply requires that you stop gripping the fear you refuse to release. Fear gains strength when the heart is rigid. Jesus brings courage when the heart becomes open. This descent into openness requires honesty. It requires acknowledging that your attempts to manage fear have only tightened its hold. It requires recognizing that clarity has not returned through effort. It requires admitting that your reasoning has reached its limit. This is not a failure. It is the threshold where Jesus begins his work. Surrender invites him into the places where fear once ruled without challenge. It invites him to reorganize what pressure has disordered. It invites him to breathe into the spaces where anxiety has suffocated your peace. Descartes taught that truth becomes visible when the mind removes everything that cannot be trusted. Surrender reflects this principle. It removes the assumptions that fear has built. It removes the conclusions drawn from exhaustion. It removes the narratives created by panic. When these layers fall away, truth becomes clearer. Jesus does not enter through the noise. He enters through the stillness created by surrender. Stillness is not passive. It is intentional. It is the quieting of the internal chaos, so his presence can fill the space fear once dominated. The sacred descent into surrender brings a shift in perception. What once felt overwhelming becomes something you can observe without collapsing under its weight. What once felt urgent becomes something you can evaluate rather than react to. What once felt threatening becomes something Jesus can now speak into. Surrender clarifies not because it provides answers, but because it removes the distortions blocking the answers. In surrender, the heart becomes steady enough to receive courage. Courage cannot enter a heart that is clenched. It enters a heart that has opened. This descent also exposes the illusions fear has created. Fear convinces you that if you let go, everything will fall apart. But in surrender, you discover that letting go is precisely what allows everything within you to come back into order. Fear tells you that you must remain in control to feel safe. Surrender reveals that control has been the source of your exhaustion. Fear insists that you must anticipate danger. Surrender teaches you that Jesus has already seen what you cannot. In surrender, fear's reasoning dissolves and divine clarity begins to rise. The most transformative part of the sacred descent into surrender is that Jesus does not wait for you to descend perfectly. He meets you in the movement. He meets you in the honesty. He meets you in the trembling. Surrender is not the moment you prove your strength. It is the moment you give him permission to strengthen you. Once you reach this state of openness, your heart is finally prepared to receive courage, not as a theory, but as a living force. This descent prepares the internal space where Jesus can speak the words that dissolve fear's grip and awaken the strength you did not know still remained within you. The main prayer: courage, strength, reclaiming authority. Jesus, we come before you with hearts that have been tightened by fear, minds that have been pressured by uncertainty, and spirits that have been carrying weight they were never meant to hold. We bring you every moment where fear has spoken louder than truth. We bring you every situation where courage collapsed under pressure. We bring you every place where our strength felt outmatched by our circumstances. We ask that you enter this space now with the authority that dissolves fear, the presence that restores clarity, and the strength that rises from your name alone. Break fear's influence over the inner world. Touch the thoughts that have been looping without resolution. Touch the emotions that have been overwhelmed by imagined outcomes. Touch the assumptions that have shaped our perception. Break the patterns that fear has been using to maintain its control. Remove the pressure that has been suffocating peace. Remove the urgency that has been distorting discernment. Remove the lies that have convinced the heart it cannot move forward. Let your truth cut through every illusion. Let your presence silence every voice that does not come from you. Let your authority reclaim the space fear has been occupying. Strengthen the heart with the courage only you can give. Not the courage that comes from temporary confidence, but the courage that comes from alignment with your presence. Infuse the heart with a stability that does not depend on circumstances. Infuse the mind with a clarity that does not collapse under pressure. Infuse the spirit with a resilience that grows stronger under your guidance. Let this courage rise quietly but powerfully. Let it become the anchor that holds the heart steady. Let it become the force that lifts the mind out of paralysis. Let it become the assurance that you are near even when the path is not fully visible. Empower the next step with divine authority. Make the step forward undeniable, not because it is easy, but because it is aligned with your will. Illuminate the right direction with a clarity that cannot be mistaken. Remove distractions that pull the heart toward confusion. Remove opportunities that disguise themselves as safety but lead to stagnation. Remove temptations that offer relief but steal purpose. Strengthen the steps that lead toward growth. Strengthen the actions that lead toward healing. Strengthen the decisions that lead toward transformation. Let the next step carry the weight of your presence and the stability of your truth. Jesus, reclaim authority over the places where fear has ruled. Reclaim authority over the thoughts that have been shaped by anxiety. Reclaim authority over the emotions that have been influenced by insecurity. Reclaim authority over the decisions that have been guided by self-protection instead of trust. Reclaim authority over the future that fear has tried to define. You are the one who speaks peace into storms. You are the one who brings order to chaos. You are the one who strengthens the trembling heart. Let fear lose its legitimacy. Let courage rise without resistance. Let truth regain the throne of the inner world. Lift the weight that has made the mind feel fragile. Lift the heaviness that has made movement feel impossible. Lift the discouragement that has made the heart feel small. Replace these burdens with clarity. Replace them with peace. Replace them with direction. Replace them with the assurance that nothing standing ahead of us is stronger than the one walking beside us. Let your presence become the steady place where we return whenever fear tries to speak again. Let your truth become the filter for every thought. Let your courage become the strength behind every step. Jesus, breathe into the spirit that has been weary. Breathe into the heart that has been trembling. Breathe into the mind that has been overwhelmed. Let this breath restore. Let it renew. Let it awaken the courage that was buried but never destroyed. Let your breath become the force that breaks paralysis. Let it become the light that reveals the path. Let it become the strength that pushes fear out of the center. We surrender fear's hold and receive the courage you give. We release self-protection and receive your guidance. We release uncertainty and receive your clarity. We release hesitation and receive your strength. Jesus, reclaim the center. Reclaim the authority. Reclaim the direction. Let courage rise where fear once lived. The Courage Activation Principle. Courage does not arrive fully formed. It does not fall upon you as a sudden surge of boldness or appear as an emotional explosion that wipes away fear. Courage emerges through alignment. It awakens when truth and movement intersect. This is the Courage Activation Principle. It reveals that courage is not a feeling you wait to experience. Courage is a force that becomes active the moment your actions align with the truth Jesus has spoken, even when fear is still present. Courage is not born from emotional certainty. It is born from spiritual obedience. The mind often believes it must feel courageous before it can move. This is a misconception that keeps many people trapped. Waiting for the emotion of courage postpones every step forward. Waiting for complete confidence delays purpose. Waiting for fear to disappear gives fear permission to stay. The Courage Activation Principle dismantles this illusion by showing that courage does not precede movement. Movement activates courage. When you take a step in the direction Jesus is leading, the step itself ignites strength within you. Courage begins in the same place fear begins, the center of the heart. Fear takes root when the heart aligns with imagined danger. Courage takes root when the heart aligns with divine truth. Fear grows when the mind rehearses outcomes it cannot control. Courage grows when the heart trusts the one who controls the outcomes. Fear strengthens when you move away from what frightens you. Courage strengthens when you move toward the truth that calls you. This principle is not psychological theory, it is spiritual structure. The inner world responds to alignment. Descartes taught that clarity leads to right action. The courage activation principle reverses this path in a spiritual sense. Action leads to clarity. When you move in truth, your perception sharpens. Your internal courage rises to meet the motion. What once felt impossible becomes manageable. What once felt terrifying becomes familiar. What once felt overwhelming becomes something you can face with a steady heart. Movement invites Jesus into the fear, and wherever Jesus enters, fear loses influence. Courage cannot activate in a stagnant heart. Stillness becomes paralysis when it is driven by fear instead of discernment. When the heart refuses to move because it is waiting for certainty, courage has no space to grow. Courage is not the reward for confidence. It is the result of choosing truth over fear. Every time you take a step aligned with Jesus, even a small one, something inside you expands. The territory of fear shrinks. The territory of courage increases. The heart learns that movement with Jesus is safer than stillness with fear. The courage activation principle also reveals why some steps feel heavier than others. When a step challenges fear directly, it activates courage more intensely. This is why the steps you avoid are often the steps that would transform you. Fear guards the very territory where your courage is meant to develop. When you move into that territory with Jesus, you reclaim ground that fear has been occupying. The act of movement itself becomes a declaration that fear no longer holds authority over your decisions. When courage activates, it does not eliminate fear. It overrides it. Courage does not silence every anxious thought. It gives you the strength to move despite them. Courage does not erase uncertainty. It gives you the clarity to take the next step without seeing the entire path. Courage does not remove risk. It gives you the wisdom to evaluate risk accurately instead of through the lens of fear. Courage does not depend on the absence of fear. Courage depends on the presence of truth. Courage is not loud. It is steady. It does not shout. It guides. It is the quiet, stable conviction that rises when you act on what Jesus has already spoken to your heart. It is the inner strength that appears the moment you stop waiting to feel courageous and begin moving with the truth you already know. Courage is activated when trust replaces hesitation. It is activated when obedience replaces overthinking. It is activated when movement replaces paralysis. The courage activation principle prepares you for what comes next. Understanding how Jesus leads you into forward momentum and reshapes your perception, so fear no longer dictates your pace. Insight of forward momentum. Forward momentum is not simply movement. It is a state of inner progression where perception, emotion, and intention align toward the direction Jesus is leading. Many people misunderstand momentum as speed, but spiritual momentum is something far more subtle and powerful. It is the gradual but undeniable shift from internal resistance to internal cooperation. It is the moment when the heart begins to move with Jesus rather than against the pressure of fear. Momentum is not built by force. It is built by alignment. When the heart aligns with truth, every step becomes lighter, even if the challenge ahead remains the same. Fear tries to interrupt momentum by convincing you that your next step is unsafe. It introduces hesitation. It amplifies uncertainty. It magnifies every possible outcome. But Jesus leads momentum through stability. He calms the internal environment so movement becomes possible again. He does not push you into the next step. He prepares you for it. He steadies the inner world until the step that once felt impossible begins to feel necessary. Momentum begins the moment your heart recognizes that moving forward with him is less dangerous than remaining trapped in fear. One of the key insights about forward momentum is that Jesus rarely reveals the entire path at once. He illuminates only what is required for the next step. This principle transforms the way you view uncertainty. You do not need full visibility to move. You need only enough light for the next small movement. This is not a limitation, it is protection. Full visibility would overwhelm your current strength. Jesus reveals direction in proportion to your readiness. Momentum grows step by step, truth by truth, alignment by alignment. Descartes taught that one must move from simple truths to more complex conclusions. Momentum follows this same structure. Jesus begins with the simplest truth: you are not alone. From that truth, he he builds clarity. From clarity, he builds courage. From courage, he builds movement. Over time, movement becomes momentum, and momentum becomes transformation. When fear tries to interrupt this progression, it uses confusion to break the chain. It tries to distort perception so you doubt the truths you already know. But when Jesus stabilizes the mind, the chain reforms and momentum resumes. Another essential element of forward momentum is the reorientation of perception. Fear narrows perception. It restricts your field of vision. It makes you focus on danger, not possibility. It frames every uncertainty as a threat. Jesus widens that field. He expands your perspective until you can see beyond the immediate pressure. He reveals pathways you had not noticed. He reveals strengths you had not acknowledged. He reveals resources you had not considered. Momentum often begins not with movement of the feet, but with expansion of the mind. Forward momentum also requires the reframing of risks. Fear exaggerates risk by filling the unknown with imagined outcomes. Jesus reframes risk through truth. He shows you that some risks are simply opportunities misunderstood. He shows you that some risks are invitations disguised as challenges. He shows you that some risks are stepping stones toward growth. When the heart adopts this new frame, the same situation that once triggered paralysis becomes a doorway to transformation. Reframing does not remove risk. It positions it within a context where Jesus leads rather than fear dictates. Momentum becomes stronger when spiritual perception sharpens. This sharpening is not mystical. It is the result of the inner world returning to order. When your thoughts stop spiraling and your emotions stop tightening, spiritual perception gains clarity. You begin to sense direction sooner. You recognize internal warning signs with greater accuracy. You feel the difference between fear-based hesitation and spirit-led hesitation. This sharpened awareness makes movement more intentional and less reactive. The path becomes easier to follow not because it changes, but because you are perceiving it correctly. Forward momentum also rebuilds internal confidence. Confidence is not arrogance. It is the recognition that Jesus walks with you. Confidence grows as you witness small victories, subtle breakthroughs, and internal shifts. You begin to trust his voice more rapidly. You begin to respond to his leading more freely. You begin to move without the constant battle between fear and obedience. Momentum eventually becomes a new rhythm, a rhythm where the heart moves with direction rather than resistance. This insight prepares you for the next stage of transformation, the moment where Jesus restores courage so fully that fear can no longer determine the pace, the path, or the decisions ahead of you. The strengthened path. There comes a moment in your spiritual journey where the path ahead does not change, yet your relationship with it becomes completely different. What once felt impossible begins to feel accessible. What once felt heavy begins to feel purposeful. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel aligned. This is the strengthened path. It is not a new road. It is the same road viewed through a renewed inner structure. When Jesus strengthens your heart, he strengthens the path beneath your feet by transforming the way you walk upon it. A weakened heart turns every step into resistance. It interprets small challenges as insurmountable obstacles. It magnifies the demands of the future. It anticipates failure before movement even begins. Fear shapes the terrain into something far more intimidating than reality. But when Jesus infuses courage, the inner landscape changes and the outer path follows. The strengthened path is born when the heart no longer mirrors fear's distortions. It begins to mirror Jesus' clarity instead. Jesus does not promise an easier path. He promises a stronger heart, and a stronger heart perceives the same terrain through a different lens. Obstacles no longer signify defeat. They indicate growth. Delays no longer provoke panic. They reveal preparation. Uncertainty no longer signals danger. It becomes an opening for trust. The strengthened path is the evidence that your internal world has begun cooperating with truth rather than reacting to fear. Movement becomes intentional. Thought becomes steady. Emotion becomes grounded. Descartes believed that once the mind establishes a firm foundation, it can evaluate everything else with greater certainty. Jesus becomes that foundation. When your inner foundation is stable, the path ahead becomes clearer, not because circumstances have changed, but because your perception has matured. Stability inside creates clarity outside. The strengthened path emerges when your internal reasoning regains order. What once felt chaotic now feels navigable. What once felt unpredictable now feels structured. What once felt threatening now feels proportionate. On the strengthened path, you begin to notice details you previously overlooked. You recognize subtle signs of direction. You notice moments of divine timing that fear once obscured. You discern opportunities that previously looked like risks. You sense when to advance, when to pause, and when to adjust. This heightened awareness is not intuition, it is alignment. The heart aligned with Jesus becomes a vessel of clarity. It interprets the path through truth, not fear. Truth reveals the structure beneath the uncertainty. Fear hides it. As the path strengthens beneath you, your pace begins to change. You no longer move with hesitation. You no longer question every step. You no longer carry the weight of imagined dangers. Your steps gain rhythm. Your decisions gain confidence. Your mind gains quiet strength. You move not because fear has disappeared, but because Jesus has reclaimed authority over your perception. The path becomes a reflection of the one guiding you, not the fear resisting you. The strengthened path also transforms the way you respond to setbacks. Instead of collapsing under pressure, you interpret pressure as refinement. Instead of seeing obstacles as signs to stop, you see them as redirections that shape resilience. Instead of fearing the unknown, you engage with it through trust. The heart strengthened by Jesus is capable of enduring tension without breaking, capable of facing uncertainty without retreating, and capable of advancing without needing absolute clarity. Strength is not measured by the force of your movement, but by the stability behind it. This path is strengthened because Jesus walks it before you. He steps into the places that once intimidated you. He carries the weight that once discouraged you. He reveals the direction that once confused you. The path becomes stable because he is stable. The path becomes secure because he is secure. The path becomes purposeful because he is purposeful. Strength is not something you generate. It is something you receive by walking in alignment with the one who leads you. The strengthened path prepares you for the final transformation, the blessing that seals courage within you so that fear no longer dictates your identity, your decisions, or your future. Blessing of restored courage. May your heart now enter a place where fear no longer defines the boundaries of your life. May every part of you that once felt fragile under pressure rise with renewed strength. May the courage Jesus has awakened within you become the force that shapes your decisions and the foundation that stabilizes your path. You have walked through the inner landscape where fear tried to tighten your mind and weaken your direction. Now may you walk forward knowing that fear no longer holds the authority it once carried. What once controlled your perception has lost its influence. What once dictated your choices has lost its voice. What once intimidated your steps has lost its position at the center of your heart. May Jesus fill you with a clarity that quiets every internal storm. Let his truth replace every distorted thought. Let his presence dissolve every imagined danger. Let his guidance illuminate the places where uncertainty once created tension. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. Courage means Jesus has reclaimed the center of your inner world. May this courage settle into you with the weight of truth. May it anchor your thoughts. May it steady your emotions. May it strengthen your spirit. May it become the quiet force that pushes you forward even when the path is not yet fully visible. May your steps become firm, not because the road is smooth, but because your heart is aligned. You are no longer walking according to fear's predictions. You are walking according to Jesus' direction. May every decision ahead be guided by his voice, not your anxiety. May every challenge ahead be interpreted through his strength, not your weakness. May every unknown ahead be approached with the confidence that he has already walked before you. Let him be the foundation beneath every movement. Let him be the clarity behind every choice. Let him be the stability beneath every step. May your courage grow in a way that fear cannot resist. Let it grow quietly but steadily. Let it rise through obedience. Let it strengthen through alignment. Let it mature through surrender. Courage is not a momentary burst of boldness. Courage is the permanent restructuring of your inner world around truth. May this restructuring continue long after this moment ends. May you carry it into every conversation, every responsibility, and every uncertainty. May it remind you that your heart has been reclaimed by the one who is not moved by pressure, not shaken by circumstance, and not limited by the fears that once overwhelmed you. May your identity no longer be shaped by hesitation. May it be shaped by the confidence that comes from belonging to Jesus. May you no longer see yourself through the lens of past fears, but through the clarity of the one who calls you forward. You are not defined by the moments where fear held you back. You are defined by the one who now leads you through them. May this truth echo within you when doubt tries to return. May it steady your breath. May it strengthen your thoughts. May it remind you that courage is no longer something you chase. It is something you carry. May your spirit remain attuned to the guidance of Jesus. May you sense his direction in moments of stillness and in moments of movement. May you feel his nearness when decisions grow heavy. May you recognize his voice when thoughts become crowded. May you follow his leading, even when the path feels narrow. He is not only your source of courage, he is the keeper of your direction. Let your confidence come from his stability, not your certainty. Let your strength come from his presence, not your preparation. As you leave this moment, may courage accompany every step you take. May it become the internal atmosphere through which you interpret your world. May it reshape your expectations, rebuild your decisions, and redefine your pace. You are not walking toward courage. You are walking with it. Jesus has restored it. Jesus has strengthened it. Jesus has anchored it. And the path ahead carries the evidence of his work within you.